So I'm going to be doing a Stephen King book review this evening. I'm going to go through a few Stephen King books over the next coming weeks to review that I've read recently. But this one, apart from the video on Later, which is the newest book by Stephen King, this one is If It Bleeds. It's a collection of short stories, 4 stories in total in this book. The main one being If It Bleeds, and that is a sequel to a brilliant Stephen King book and a TV series as well, by the way, called The Outsider. It's a brilliant sort of whodunit, mixed with standard Stephen King supernatural, but also a crime detective novel as well. But it also ties into a trilogy that he did a few years ago called the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. Again, another brilliant TV series as well. I'd recommend anybody to watch both The Outsider and Mr. Mercedes as well, but the main character on those is called Holly Gibney. She is more of like a sort of on the spectrum detective, very sort of awkward, socially awkward character, beautifully played in both TV series as well, but in the books she's pretty much the sort of the gem of all those 4 books, and she's the main character in If It Bleeds as well. But this book in particular, I listened to it on Audible. It was around 15 hours listening time. You can get the book on hard copy, which is around 520 pages, I think it is on hard copy. Looking at it on Amazon there, some pretty decent prices actually. So you can get the Kindle version for less than £5, which is pretty good. If you are, and I always recommend everyone to subscribe to Audible if you can, get at least 1 credit a month, especially if you do a lot of commuting or you go to the gym a lot, or there's a lot of sort of activities where you would, even in work, I suppose myself in work, I listen to a lot of books as well. So if you can, I definitely see if you can pick this one up on Audible. The narrators are absolutely superb, and this Bill Paxton, famous actor, he's been narrating the majority of the Stephen King Mr. Mercedes trilogy and the Outsider books as well, so he's got that consistency in If It Bleeds as well, which is brilliant. But I'll go through each one of the short stories just to give you a little overview and some information about those stories as well. I think it's a really interesting book, and I was really impressed when it came out because it's the first sort of collection of short stories that I've read of Stephen King. I know that he's done it in the past, in the 90s he's done this a couple of times, and I know that a lot of brilliant Stephen King novels have come from short stories such as The Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, The Children of the Corn as well. Some really, really good short stories that have come out of Stephen King. So, but in this book, I mean, you've got the first story that opens up is called Mr. Harrigan's Phone. So what this story is about is a great relationship between an old fella and a young boy who befriends Mr. Harrigan, and he is a very rich sort of like ex-Wall Street ex-investor type fella. He's pretty much not long for this world, but they strike up a really compelling friendship, a lot of brilliant detail and some excellent dialogue as well in the short story. What triggers the story is that Mr. Harrigan buys like a sort of a scratch off lottery ticket, or like a and puts that in a birthday card for this young boy. He happens to win a little bit of money on there, and he buys a mobile phone for Mr. Harrigan so he can speak to him. Just because he loves technology, and just so happens that Mr. Harrigan unfortunately does die in the movie. And what the sort of the turn on the story happens is that whilst the boy is going through some tribulations in his life thereafter, that he's being bullied, he is able to send messages to the phone, and Mr. Harrigan is buried with the phone. But when he actually does send him messages, he actually gets replies, and thereon after things start to happen to the people who are affecting his life. So, for instance, there is a bully who starts to intimidate this young boy, and after that, then the bully, well, it's safe to say, doesn't come off on the best side of things after Mr. Harrigan intervenes, or fate intervenes as well. But later on, then the boy grows up, and likewise It's a cautionary tale then about the sort of the, be careful what you wish for, which is really sort of not really an original story, but Stephen King's little take on that, but with a really compelling and interesting dynamic between the two characters as well. I thought there was, potential even to sort of expand the story as well, but I suppose, with everything, if he did expand the story, there are a few Stephen King books which are expanded stories, which I thought maybe that could have been shortened up a little bit. There's a book I recently read called Revival, and that really went on quite a lot longer than what I'd sort of hoped was the conclusion for the book as well. It was building up to something and didn't really deliver. Whereas I think this little short story was quite nice actually. It was an old sort of saying, an old tale, an old cautionary tale, but just told in a new setting with obviously new technology as well then. So the second short story, which was quite bizarre really, quite interesting, was called The Life of Chuck. And this story is actually told in reverse. So it's a three act or three chapter short story told from Act 3 backwards. And the opening of the third act is really telling the sort of the end of the world, the sort of an apocalyptic sort of happening that's going on at the time. But it's a story about people are seeing sort of congratulatory messages for this guy called Chuck about his life, which is quite intriguing, and it's all sort of knitting together as it goes further back about who this person is. So Chuck in himself is actually dying. He's dying. He's got a moon-shaped scar on his body as well, and we're sort of given little bits of details about what's happened previously in his life, in his adult life, but also as a child as well. And it is really intriguing, but I thought it was quite a bizarre tale in that as it does go back, it does get more deeper, as a deeper meaning of the short story about the importance of every individual, and that the world is more or less like a cyclical existence in the sense that everything is life and death, rebirth. And it was quite interesting to see that there's a little part at the end of Act 1 where, as a young child, this Chuck does foresee in the future a man dying in a hospital bed with the crescent-shaped scar which he has on his body. So it's one of these ones where it's very thought-provoking. I thought it was a decent story, but it was the sort of the warm-up act for the main story, which is If It Bleeds, which is the one really I was really looking forward to buying this book in particular for. So although it is a short story, I can't overestimate how brilliant the Mr. Mercedes trilogy was, and Stephen King's sequel then to that, which was The Outsider. So especially The Outsider was absolutely amazing. I really enjoyed that, and it's one of those books like Later and a few others that he's done recently where it does really sort of show that he's rediscovered that sort of brilliant writing form that he had in the 80s and the early 90s as well. So hats off to Stephen King there. So If It Bleeds, as I mentioned, the main character is a lady by the name of Holly Gibney. She runs a detective agency in which she inherited from the main character from the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, Bill Hodges. There's a lot of overlap between her friends, the Robinsons from the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, who they kind of like, they help out around the detective agency. It starts off as, there's just a missing dog, and it doesn't really go too much deep initially into the events of either the Mr. Mercedes trilogy or the Outsider. But what Holly Gibney then sees on television then afterwards is there was an explosion at a school which injured quite a lot of people, and on the scene there was a news reporter who Holly suspects, gets a suspicion that he was on scene awfully quick to the scene where the bomb had gone off at the school. So, triggered by her suspicion, she starts to investigate a little bit more about who this person is. She comes across another researcher who has been following this reporter for some time. Now, to go back into the events of The Outsider, which was fantastic. The Outsider was a story about a man who they had found children and a child dead in the woods, had been assaulted and severely brutalized, and the person who was accused of killing this child was the baseball coach. However, the very same baseball coach at the very same time was at a conference miles and miles away and was on CCTV. And that premise of being in two places at the same time was really intriguing. But later on, as the story went on, it was explained that there was a creature by the name of El Cuco, which is more or less like a Stephen King's take on a shapeshifter, that would scratch the person that they intended to change into, and then they started, using their power, drawing energy to accomplish the full change. And that is what Holly then and this other researcher suspects, that the reporter is actually another creature, another Cuco, as it's alluded to that in The Outsider, that it isn't the only one, it isn't the only creature on that exists this way. So it's a really good villain, and the sort of the cat and mouse game between Holly and the reporter, aka the El Cuco, is pretty good. It's a lot more sinister, I find, than The Outsider, whereas the sort of the creature from The Outsider it was a big build up. It was very savage, but it was not after the limelight. It was not looking to be found, if I could put it that way. He just wanted to survive and move on. Whereas this one, I find, was quite happy to be in the limelight on the TV, almost toying with Holly Gibney as well in this story, which I really enjoyed. And it was awfully too short, because the overlap between The Outsider sort of world with Ralph, which is the detective from The Outsider, who Holly is constantly talking to in this story, as well as the Robinsons, as I've previously said, from the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. It would be brilliant to get all these characters together again in one more story. I know it's being really greedy, but I thought it was that good of a story, and it's a brilliant ending as well, which does give closure to this exact story. But then obviously, like with everything, now they've built up this sort of creature character, El Cuco, it does leave the door open again then for other stories, other tales to be told as well then, which is pretty good. So but the main thing is this character is absolutely brilliant, Holly Gibney. I don't think since the character from The Stand, The Man in Black, and The Dark Tower, who is in quite a lot of Stephen King stories, I don't think there's been a character that I've really enjoyed as much as Holly Gibney. She's absolutely brilliant. So hopefully he can write a couple more stories, and at least another one with Holly in there as well. They are talking about doing a second series actually of The Outsider, so hopefully that's not going to be your sort of loosely based series from the original, but I do know that the series, which was on HBO, it was a lot longer than what the book was, and Stephen King did assist with some of the story building, the world building within. It slightly deviated from the book, but I thought for the better. And there is a lot of scope to expand the story, and hopefully he's involved with it as well. Because if they just sort of disregarded it, really, I mean, it wouldn't have that same authenticity or Stephen King stamp on that story as well, and particularly if he's planning to write another book, which I really hope he does. And the last story then is called Rat, and this was equally as brilliant. So Rat is a take on the old famous monkey's paw tale. So everyone has seen a version of this story at some time. It's kind of like the Aladdin story, but the monkey's paw is the original story, going to a Middle Eastern sort of market, and a man offering you a monkey's paw, in which when the palm is open, you've got that many wishes. But the wishes unfortunately have a sort of side effect to them as well, despite the good that's intended with each wish. So with Rat, it was very, very much the same. A lot of Stephen King's sort of stories revolve around an author or scriptwriter, or I suppose he's writing what he knows. But this character is a family man. He's not so much got a writer's block, but he's very frustrated. He's written a couple of short stories in the past and got some accreditation and some fame, but he's looking really, this character, to sort of get a new novel banged out and get it done, and sort of allow his promise of being a writer to deliver for his family, particularly his wife, which it seems they have a bit of a sort of tense, strained relationship based upon the fact that he's unable to deliver the book in which he's promising, which will give them the money, the access, and more comfortable life. So what this guy does then is he actually goes to a cabin, and he's suffering sort of emotionally, physically, spiritually, and while at the cabin trying to complete his writing, a storm hits, and whilst in the middle of the storm, he sees a rat that's sort of inhabiting the cabin with him, and makes a deal. The rat is talking to him, whether it's actually real or just figurative of his imagination, or of him having a psychotic breakdown, we don't know. But he makes a deal with the rat. If he saves his life, and he's able to give one of his loved ones, the rat will says that you will finish your novel, and you will have success. So he does. He takes it, and he completes the novel, leaves the cabin, and the last sort of build up then towards the end of the book then is that he arrives home to his family. In which case, it's alluded to then that the rat took the family as the sort of the bargain to deliver the novel, to deliver the success that he, as a writer, solely wanted, to break that writer's block. So another a cautionary tale, and really, like I say, a take on the old-fashioned monkey's paw story. But overall, I thought you got quite a few different stories there. Stories which leave you wanting more. Definitely Rat was it was perfectly sort of measured, and the pacing of it was fine, was really good. I think the Life of Chuck was intriguing, but I probably wouldn't. I don't think that was the strongest part of the entire book, in all honesty. But the Mr. Harrigan's film was absolutely brilliant, and the part afterwards, which was If It Bleeds, was absolutely superb, and that's why I bought the book in the first place, and it was brilliant. Overall, though, I think I would give, on the strength of how good If It Bleeds was, I would give it a 4 out of 5. I thought it was a pretty good book overall. If It Bleeds, the actual story, was by far and away the strongest point of it, and hopefully there will be a sequel to The Outsider, a full sequel, or a sequel to If It Bleeds as well. But hopefully there's going to be not just a short story, but a bigger fleshed out version of the Holly Gibney character again. Like I say, if you want to try and find out a little bit more before you actually take on this book, I highly recommend you read The Outsider, or the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. You don't need to read all of the Mr. Mercedes trilogy before The Outsider, but just to give you a full appreciation of the character, I would say if you do enjoy that, then definitely read everything that she's in. But overall, like I say, 4 out of 5. I thought the book was pretty good. Pricing wise, I can see that the paperback is around £7, £7.50. You can get it on Audible, don't need to pay £22. You can get it for £8.99 for one credit, and on Kindle it's £5. I'd say definitely get it on Kindle, whatever the cheapest version is, to be honest. But yeah, that's my review for this book, and I would really appreciate it if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you can, give me a comment to let me know what you thought of the book as well. I will be doing a few more Stephen King books in the future, and if you have any particular recommendations